I wanted to talk a moment today about Voltaire. He's one of those philosophers that I was not expecting on really liking that much, especially after, I had read the ancient philosophers. The ancients were absolutely mind-blowing, and, pursuing the first cause of all thought, the first cause of all things, that kind of thing. So when I heard about Voltaire and was considering reading him, I wasn't really expecting that. But let me tell you guys, Voltaire, man, he's in a league of his own. Okay, his whole philosophy kind of aligns with the whole "we don't know anything" idea. Is that mankind is generally ignorant of history. We're missing context. We're missing, information. Information's been hidden from us, right? Information has been changed. Things have been changed. Beliefs have changed. Opinions have changed. It's one of those things where he's basically like, look, we don't really know as a society what the truth is. Voltaire was one of the great Enlightenment thinkers of his time. And it's thanks to him that mankind, kind of got to the viewpoints that they're at today. Some may view that as a problem. Some may view that as a great thing. That's up for you to decide. But his overall philosophy was quite fascinating. He wrote books like The Candide, or the Philosophy of History. He wrote the Treatise on Toleration and the Philosophical Dictionary. His various claims are that, modern religion is more or less of a plagiarism of ancient religion. He draws parallels between Abraham and Brahma, and various other ancient deities and ancient figures that have been copied and plagiarized, and the names have been slightly changed to give them new meaning in order to control society today. He was very against persecution. He was around in the 1700s. So it's one of those things where he lambasted the Catholic Church on the way they would treat the heretics, right? And we all know what they did to those people, most horrific things imaginable, all because they said they didn't believe the same thing the established Catholic Church said they believed. And just the way he writes, it's hilarious. The things he says. I mean, he's obviously being careful because he knew who the powers that be were at the time. He knew the people that were in control at the time, so he was careful the way he worded things. But the way he worded things was straight up satire, right? Most of Voltaire's philosophy was on toleration, right? That we should all tolerate each other's viewpoints, no matter the religion, no matter any kind of belief system. We should all tolerate each other. We should all hear each other out, not persecute each other, because that's absolutely absurd. You claim to serve a loving God, right? Yet you put people to death, right? That say that they don't believe in the same God. How does that make any sense? And he draws parallels between the current times, in the 1700s, when they were, the way they would persecute heretics, right? And then he would draw parallels to the ancient times, the various cultures that would put people to death for what they believe. And he does a really good job of explaining the absurdities of such a thing. And his whole belief was that it's very easy for the mob, the mainstream culture, the mainstream population to become fanatical in their beliefs, and that it's very important that we be careful to avoid fanaticism, that we avoid just blindly following what we've been told, that we're blindly following the established religion of the day. And he draws traces throughout history of various established religions that have put people to death for their beliefs, and he talks about the irony and the just straight up absurdity of such a thing. You claim to, serve a loving God, yet at the same time, you put all of these people to death for what they say they believe in, if it just slightly disagrees with what you say is acceptable. He was very harsh. He went after the established religion very hard. We know what that was in the 1700s. It was the Catholic Church, generally speaking, was still the one in power. And at the same time, you had the newly formed Protestants, right, who had been around for about 100 years or so, that were confronting those belief systems and things like that. And then so out of the Protestant Reformation, you had the Enlightenment philosophers, the ones who both inspired it and helped carry the Protestant Reformation further. These men really questioned the status quo of the belief systems of the time. You had men like René Descartes, who questioned everything and doubted everything and came to the conclusion that, cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am, I exist. That was the only thing he could be certain of. But then he was also certain of there was a first cause to his thought. I'm a thinking thing, yes, but there's something behind my thoughts that's causing those thoughts to happen. So that was René Descartes. He basically tries to prove the existence of God through the act of thought and the act of meditation. And I feel like if you read his books, he did a pretty convincing job of, describing the first cause, which then aligns with Neoplatonism, the whole ideal thought, the whole upper thought realm, the whole intelligible realm that Plato used to talk about. So there's those connections there, and then you can actually make a lot of connections between Christianity and Neoplatonism, but for some reason the Catholic Church ended up taking it and distorting it and making it into a very dogmatic, hardline, intolerant position to where they were going very hard after people who didn't believe what they believed. And that has obviously since changed, and you could actually probably thank the Enlightenment philosophers for the softening of religious systems today. And we wouldn't have that precedent set today on toleration and freedom of speech and freedom of thought and freedom of expression. It's thanks to these men that such ideas were allowed to be established and then blew up under the new forms of government that came around in the 1800s. In his treatise for toleration, Voltaire brings up the story of a man named Jean Calas, who was a Protestant man whose son became a Catholic, and apparently his son died, and so the Catholic Church accused him of murdering his son for becoming Catholic. And so the more radical element of that wing of religion, that belief system, actually ended up putting Jean Calas to death on the wheel. His wife almost died, but she was spared thanks to one thing the man that Jean Calas said. Jean Calas, while he was dying on the wheel, essentially said, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do," more or less along those lines. And it brought such sympathy to the crowd and to the judges that they actually spared his wife. So there's two things there that shows. It shows the intoleration of the established religion of the time, right? That would basically burn heretics and kill them in the most horrific ways imaginable in past history. But it also shows by an act of mercy, similar to the way that Jesus did on the cross, it turned the hearts of the crowd to make them more compassionate. Which makes you wonder, what's the actual true religion here? Was it the established religion that wanted certain practices done? Was it the certain established religion that wanted a certain belief system to be believed and under the threat of being damned, which is basically fear-based control, you could say? Or was the true religion the man who was dying who said, "Forgive them," and had compassion on them and asked mercy on the people who were putting him to death? My belief is the true religion was the man who was dying on the wheel, and what he said and what he did, that showed a true mark of salvation or redemption, as opposed to the form of religion that was murdering him of that day. And Voltaire brings you to that same conclusion. If you read the treatise on toleration, he brings up several stories and several ideas that basically prove the absurdity of the form of religion. He draws various parallels between the plagiarism that has seemingly taken hold of modern belief systems and modern religions, and proven the absurdity of them by showing what the ancients, starting all the way from the Chaldeans and before that, going through Babylon, going through Greece, going through Rome. He shows all of their belief systems, traces all of their belief systems, and shows how not that much has really changed as far as a belief system. In fact, all they did was copy their beliefs and change a few names and then call it their own. So many of the modern forms, according to Voltaire, during his day, have basically assimilated the beliefs from the ancient times and made it into a modern belief system. And then in a very intolerant fashion, in order to stay in control, right, they control the masses through fear of damnation if they do not practice those religions. All while at the same time claiming that they serve a loving God, a graceful God, one that's full of compassion and full of mercy, yet they must put you to death if you don't believe what they do, because they can't allow society to be damned for not believing what they do. It seems like very absurd logic, and Voltaire does a very effective job of kind of really hammering that point home. So the key for Voltaire was toleration. He wanted toleration in his day. He believed in toleration. He believed that we didn't really know anything. It was impossible to know, from ages past exactly what happened. So it's important to keep an open mind. It's important to stay tolerant. It's important to allow freedom of ideas, freedom of thought, freedom of expression. And without those things, you can't have a truly free society, no matter what they say. So if you read Philosophy of History, if you read Treatise of Toleration, if you read the Philosophical Dictionary, those same threads are weaved throughout all of those books. Okay, and I don't know if I've read all of his books. I'm sure I have quite a few left. I'm still going to read the Candide, but the key that I've found from Voltaire so far has been toleration and understanding we don't really know much of anything. And as I've shown in my past videos, many of the philosophers of past ages, and even just a few hundred years ago, all the way to several thousand years ago, they all understood this one thing, that we don't really know anything. We shouldn't have the conceit of knowledge. We shouldn't believe that we really know anything, and we certainly should not persecute others for what they believe. And these men do a really good job through expressing these ideas. They kind of indirectly and directly at the same time, right? They prove how authoritarian everything really is in their time. If you don't have toleration, it's not really freedom. And those that have a shallow belief system, those who are based on the forms of religion, they generally control the masses through fear of damnation, through fear of punishment. If you don't follow this, then you're going to have these horrible consequences befall you. You're going to be damned for eternity. So, and some of the most interesting stuff that Voltaire goes into is ancient history, how the Chaldeans had certain names for gods, how the Israelites, the Hebrews did, how the Christians do, and then he shows all the parallels between them all. And in a very effective way, is almost very convincing in showing and proving that everything is just a plagiarism of each other. And people hand down these belief systems, and then over time, it essentially distorts the truth and confuses people, and the people in power know this, and so they use it to control the masses. In a very logical way, a very rational way, he proves that the true religion is the religion of toleration, the religion of allowing you to hold your belief, of listening to the other point of view, of non-violence, of non-aggression, and not controlling through fear. How can you claim to live by the words of Christ, but yet threaten to put people to death for not believing what you do or holding the same views you do? He points to the Quakers actually as being true Christianity. And we know with the Quakers, historically, they were condemned as being heretical. They were condemned as being full of crap, and people would make fun of them. The term Quaker is actually a derogatory term. But he proves that those people were actually the true Christians, the one that truly taught and lived what Jesus taught in the Beatitudes and through the New Testament. So Voltaire is a very interesting person. I encourage you to read his books for yourself, come to your own conclusion. But, I was pretty impressed when I read his work. I'm obviously more familiar with the ancient philosophy and that kind of stuff. But now that I'm starting to dig a little bit into Enlightenment philosophy, during the Renaissance, I'm quite fascinated by the minds that I'm seeing and the people that were put there in that time, and what they found themselves saying. It seems to be like what we really needed as a society to catapult us into an age of freedom and an age of innovation and freedom of expression and freedom of thought, and the lack of persecution that we actually find ourselves in. And it's important to actually take what these men say and then apply it to our own life in any way possible. Obviously we can't do it in a literal way, but we can take the overall essence of what they taught and realize I shouldn't persecute or put down or try to shut down anyone who doesn't believe what I believe. One, I don't really know anything, and two, what I believe, actually the essence of those beliefs teach to not do any harm to anyone. And yet if I'm willing to do harm to people, for my belief systems, do I really believe what I say I do? Or am I simply controlled by the established powers of that day, that's trying to stay in power themselves? So I hope you found that somewhat informative. I encourage you, I've showed you the books on the screen. I hope you look into them yourself and come to your own conclusions on, everything I say. Very interesting stuff, and it's definitely worth the time looking into yourself. So if you like what you watched, please like, follow, subscribe, leave a comment below. I love to talk about this stuff, and, I'll see you around. Thanks.